Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and our next guest is a dear friend who's been working hard at changing hearts and minds as long as I've known him. It's an honor. I'm 6 inches taller and a better dancer because I know Bishop E.W. Jackson, president of STAND, Staying True to America's Destiny. And good to see you again, sir. Thanks for joining us. And you've got a new initiative to fight back against communism. How has everything been going for you, first and foremost?
Well, of course, Joe, it's always a pleasure to be on with you and to talk to you. And, things have been going great. Of course, we're busy because there are a lot of issues that our country is facing right now. And, we just started a new initiative called Stand Against Communism because we want people to know, A, that Marxism is a whole, that you can't separate socialism from communism from Marxism. They're all the same thing. And no matter how much Bernie Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez try to convince people that, no, we're talking about a different kind of socialism. It's Marxism. Marxism is communism. And secondly, we want people to be motivated and inspired and mobilized to get out and vote their values and vote for freedom because, of course, the ideology that these folks represent, no matter how softly they present it, is really the opposite of liberty. And we want freedom in our country. That's the basis and foundation for our prosperity and our success as a nation. And we don't need an ideology that's going to take that away.
We need both parties involved in this too, EW, because I don't think, and really I've seen too many of my Republican friends kind of teetering in this sort of business socialism where, through economic development agencies and things like that, they're redistributing wealth to businesses who are behaving just like unions are. The chambers of commerce are out there saying, protect my union members, don't let other people start businesses and challenge them. And I think it's what's really created these enormous pockets of poverty where folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her ilk go in and sow the seeds of this communist dictatorship.
Joe, freedom works.
Amen.
It really works. My wife and I were commenting on the fact that you can go out now and buy a high-definition television, 32 inches. Some places you can get it for $160, $170. When they first came out, they would have cost you $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, because the free market and competition always makes the delivery of goods and services more efficient at lower cost and gives more people an opportunity to raise their standard of living. And the more the government gets involved and the more regulations and the more control, the more prices are higher and the less access average people in our country have to those goods and services. Socialism doesn't work, and everywhere we try it, we find out it doesn't work. So, we've got to come back to those foundational principles. More freedom means more opportunity, higher standard of living, more prosperity for everybody, including in health care and in education. You get the government out of the way, let competition reign, and watch the prices go down and the delivery of services become more efficient.
And wages go up because more people are competing for. If you nail two things together, if you're a carpenter, and more people need carpenters, well, then you can demand a higher wage, and you are worth a higher wage by your skills, and that's just it is the marketplace at work. StandAmerica.us is EW's website. E.W. Jackson is on with us this week. Why is it when we have such ringing examples of what communism does, are we still, to this day, convincing ourselves that somehow American communism would be better than Russian communism or Chinese communism or Venezuelan communism or Zimbabwean communism?
Joe, I don't mean to over-spiritualize this, but I'm convinced that the further we get away from God and the further we get away from Judeo-Christian values, the more these things appeal to us because we develop a perverted view of fairness and equality. We think that somehow the government can control everything and everybody, and it can make everything fair and everybody equal. Well, that sounds utopian, but it is completely unrealistic, and it always ends at the point of a gun, because you can't make everything fair. Life is not fair. You know, I've often said, Joe, how come I can't sing? You know?
Well, there should be a government
that's just the way
program.
it goes.
Yeah.
Some people have that gift, some people don't. You take life as you find it, and you use your own gifts and abilities to try to go to the highest place those gifts and abilities will take you. I mean, you're a radio talk show host and commentator. Not everybody can do that job. Not everybody has the ability to do it. So we need to just give people assured that there's equality of opportunity to fulfill your God-given gifts and abilities. But when you say there is no God, that doesn't matter, we're going to create our own sense of fairness, and we're going to make equality a reality. And unfortunately, there's only one way that they have to affect that, and it's by the use of governmental force. Yeah. And people end up being slaves of the state instead of the state being a servant of the people.
We were just doing a segment before you came on the program about how the government is buying off all these local governments and bankrupting us. We've $22 trillion in debt and 1,300 programs where the government sends money to the local government to buy off their fealty. I don't know if we can stand it any longer, but bankruptcy is what kills so many democracies, E.W., the collapse of their economy. And once that economy collapses, chaos, and then a strongman dictator moves in. And I'm afraid for our country that we could see that happen very soon.
Well, look, I think we're seeing the rhetoric that can take us there. I mean, when this Green New Deal was proposed and you got presidential candidates embracing it, anybody who looks closely at that will acknowledge that thing requires the complete takeover of the economy and the complete takeover of all private property. And when you have leaders saying, yeah, I think that's a great thing, to me, you've got the seeds of totalitarianism there. And so you're right. I mean, look, we need to remember, Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela. He was elected.
Yep.
He turned the country into a socialist nightmare.
Confiscated the guns, and then it was Johnny bar the door.
Yep. And that's to me, that's exactly the way it can happen in our country, electing people who don't believe in the Constitution, don't believe in free markets, don't believe in individual liberty. They believe in some sort of collective reality. And those folks then get in power, and they move the government more and more and more in the direction of totalitarian control over people. And before you know it, you look up and you've got Ronald Reagan's prediction of what can happen when freedom is not fought for and protected. He said, we will spend our sunset years telling our children about the United States of America where we were once free. And you're right. I think that's how it happens. We can never assume it can't happen in America. Vigilance is the price of liberty.
I know that we are endowed by our Creator, E.W., with unalienable rights. With those rights are counterbalancing responsibilities. We're also endowed by our Creator with 7 deadly vices, also counterbalanced by 7 great virtues, but we seem so much more inclined to indulge those vices. Madison and George Mason and Patrick Henry wanted to guard against those vices, but that seems to be where we are, whether it's envy or sloth or greed. You mentioned Judeo-Christian values. I mean, this is the simplicity of understanding that you're not more important than the guy next to you just because you say you are.
You know, I spoke to the NAACP at an NAACP meeting a few weeks ago, and I said to them, we needed a civil rights movement when it came along, particularly under the leadership of Dr. King, who was preaching nonviolence and love for one's neighbor.
And the Constitution.
What we also needed was a civil responsibility movement as a parallel to the civil rights movement, because we all cry about civil rights, but we're forgetting our civil responsibilities, and that the two go hand in hand. And you're absolutely right. Our founding fathers believed that you could not have freedom without personal virtue. And we've forgotten that part of the equation completely. And now it's all about everybody's a victim and everybody's got demands and everybody needs a safe space and a place to cry and all of that. But what happened to even John Kennedy, a Democrat, saying, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country? That kind of virtue is unfortunately waning in our country, and we've got to recover it and restore it.
The movement is Stand Against Communism, and two things that communist dictatorships always do is they erase history and they break up the family. Which one is happening more profoundly? I'm almost at a loss to decide which one is happening faster. They've been after the family since the founding of Planned Parenthood, and the idea that you don't need a father and a mother, and that kids can get pregnant and the government will reward them, and nobody's taking responsibility for the children except the government. And now we want to erase history all across the Commonwealth and beyond. Why aren't people hearing these claxons, E.W.? Is that what you're trying to help us do?
Absolutely. We're trying to sound the alarm. Joe, I've probably called hundreds of people over the last several months, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds, personally called them on the phone. People, conservative people that I know around the country or that I've had interaction with who have contributed to my campaigns or have responded to my emails. And what alarms me is the lack of alarm. It's almost as if people say, well, we've got President Trump, and, we're all set right now, and nothing to be concerned about, nothing to see here. But they don't realize these same forces we're talking about are out to topple President Trump as well. We need to be alarmed. And so, yes, we're seeking to sound the alarm and say to people, this is something you've got to take very, very seriously. The destruction of the black family, for example, which is happening now across all demographic lines, was a socialist move in and of itself, because, let's face it, it replaced the father in the home with the father of government. It replaced personal responsibility for one's family and children with the government taking care of everything. And before you know it, you've got 40 years later, 72% of black children, and in some places like Richmond, 80% of black children being born out of wedlock. That trend is following now in every demographic in the country, and that's the result, in my view, of a kind of socialist approach to government as opposed to leaving people responsible for themselves. And Pete Buttigieg, by the way, has called to remove Thomas Jefferson from all monuments, get rid of his name. Yep. We don't need to mention him. We know he's a figure in history, but there comes a time we have to discard that. And you are absolutely right. That is what communists do. They try to rewrite history by censoring the things that they think they need to remove from history, because Thomas Jefferson is the guy who said all rights come from God, that we are endowed by our Creator, not by the beneficence of government. So I said, so if you throw him out, you want to throw that out too? I think, frankly, for some of them, Joe, the answer is yes. They'd love to throw that out.
Well, I've read the passage, I call it the Lost Passage. It's in the Library of Congress. It was the section of the Declaration that Jefferson wrote regarding the usurpations and abuses about slavery. And I said, there is nothing short of what Dr. King used to say about the Jim Crow era that I've read more eloquently does in the governmental institution of slavery and segregation and one man being superior to another. And that everyone says slavery is America's original sin. It's not. It's cronyism, where the southern states banded together to get John Adams to take that out of the Declaration, because there is no greater treatise against slavery than what Jefferson writes about the Christian king, and even points out that they had tried several times legislatively to get rid of slavery in the New World, and the king wouldn't allow it.
I will stand up for Thomas Jefferson for as long as there's breath in my body, because he, to me, articulated words that control the destiny of this nation when he wrote those powerful words in the Declaration of Independence. And you're right, he had even an even more cogent denunciation of slavery, but of course they could not come in agreement on that because there were some states that were militantly against any kind of statement against slavery. But Thomas Jefferson pricked the consciences of the American people throughout human history with those words, and I will always be proud of my country, in part because we produce people who've made those eloquent declarations of who we really are as a nation. And yes, I know Thomas Jefferson wasn't perfect, just like I'm not and you're not, nobody is. And that, we could find reasons to criticize him, just like people can find reasons to criticize us and every human being. But the question is, did he do something that, in my view, had eternal significance? And I would say yes, absolutely. And if you want to look at the bad stuff he did and not the good stuff he did, then you better turn the mirror to yourself, because if every one of us is judged by that standard, only any negative thing we've done is all anybody should look at, not the positive things that we've done. Frankly, we're all hell-bound. And so I stand up for Thomas Jefferson as one of our founding fathers, and every single one of them, because they bequeathed us something that was far greater, I think, than even they knew.
E.W., I know that the listeners, they see the things going on. I know that many of them feel daunted by, whether it's the constant attacks on the president or our liberty or our history or our families, and they feel like there's nothing they can do. But I remind them when I get a chance that a carpenter from a small fishing village wandering around talking to the poor people and the prostitutes brought down the most mighty empire known to man at the time. So I think, we all can do it if we're inspired by that. How can people help you withstand against communism?
Well, they can if they put in the URL standagainstcommunism.org, that will take them to my website, and they can click on that. They can sign up to be a part of this movement. They can go to standamerica.us, that's the website, and they can make a donation to the effort. They can sign up we've got something called Patriot Partners. Our 10th anniversary is on July 4th. And we're trying to get 243 Patriot Partners to give as little as $3 a month to our organization in celebration of our 243rd year as a nation and the 10th anniversary of STAN. So, and their prayers, of course, Joe, and I don't say that lightly, because I really believe that America is in a spiritual crisis as much as a political crisis, and we've got to come back to the spiritual principles that allowed us to become the greatest nation mankind has ever known. And by the way, let me add one thing, Joe. Slavery is not America's original sin. Slavery existed nearly 100 years before the first indentured servants arrived in Virginia in 1619, and our founding fathers inherited the institution. They did not create it, but thank God they've sowed the seeds that would ultimately end it.
Well, as the most profound thing Martin Luther King Jr. ever said is, all we ask is live up to the words on your paper. And that was why his movement was so successful, with nonviolence and just saying, listen, it's your document, not mine. Live up to it. And really, there was no recourse after that.
Well, Joe, let me just say, what I think he was really also saying was, he said when the founders wrote the Declaration of Independence, they were writing a check to which all Americans would fall heir. And so I think he was saying, you know what, it's now mine, and it's yours, and it belongs to all of us, and now let's live up to it. And I think the other thing that we can't forget, and wow, how important this is at a time of such division, is he preached love. Yep. He didn't preach hatred for white people, per se, as some would class them. He didn't preach hatred for the segregationists. He preached love. And he said, we're going to wear you down with love, and we're going to meet your physical force with soul force. And I think that ultimately was what broke the back of segregation. It wasn't just the law. It was the heart of the man reaching out to others and saying, we're going to love you anyway. And Joe, we need love in our country right now. I know we Christians are accused of being bigots and haters, but the fact of the matter is we are being vilified and accused and marginalized when, in fact, what we are saying is we love our country, we love our people, and we want the very best for every American.
I so appreciate your visit. Again, it's standagainstcommunism.org or standamerica.us. Bishop E.W. Jackson, thank you so much for your time and your visit and just some of your insight and everything and anything we can do to help. We always have your back.
Thank you, Joe. Same here, my friend. God bless you.
God bless you. And thank you all for listening this week to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Remember, it is only one generation. And as E.W. reminds us, Reagan not only said, we would just sit around if we lost it and just tell our children wistfully about the days we were free. Many people come to this nation specifically because we're free, whether they know it or not. They just know we're prosperous. And if we can explain to everyone who comes here that this is why we're prosperous, because we're free, then we're in a good place. Because a new world order that looks like the old world order is no order at all. But if one looks like our Declaration and our founding, then it's doing something for the world. Until next week, thank you for listening. I hope you had a great weekend, and we'll have one ahead of you. So long, and thanks for all the fish. On behalf of all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, I'm Joe Thomas saying so long and thanks for all the fish.